I spoke about population policy with One Nation leader Pauline Hanson on the program here last night. Now, most people recognise that immigration is out of control. More than 600,000 people added to our population last year through immigration, more than the population of Tasmania. One respected economist, Leith Van Onselen, says if you take immigration out of our economy, we're actually in recession. It's the only thing propping up our national Ponzi scheme. Leith Van Onselen, who's a co-founder of Macro Business, joins me now. Thanks for speaking to us, Leith. Just tell us about that. The R word, the recession word. You say on per capita terms, we're already there.
Mate, we've been there for 3 consecutive quarters, would you believe? So basically in the year to September last year, which is the national accounts data, it's the latest data we've got, the Australian economy actually went backwards by 0.3% in per capita terms. So what that basically says is the overall economy grew because by 2.7% because of extreme population growth. By 2.1%. But because of this, it didn't grow fast enough to keep up with the population, which grew by 2.4%. So as a result, we went backwards by 0.3%. And unfortunately, the household sector is leading that, Chris. Real per capita household disposable incomes actually fell 6% in the year to September. So everyone went backwards. And because of that, they cut their spending by nearly 2%. And that's what's basically driven us into this per capita recession. So, yeah, look, it's a very weak economy now. And it was shown up again on Tuesday's retail sales, whereby retail sales only went up by 0.8% in value terms in the year to December. But once you take out population growth and, of course, inflation, retail sales actually went backwards by 6%. So effectively, households individually are cutting back. We're in a per capita recession, but because we're adding more households than households are cutting back, the economy is continuing to grow. And it's one of these cases, Chris, whereby the overall economic pie is growing because of population growth, but everyone's share of the pie is actually shrinking. And that's why we're in a per capita recession and living standards are going backwards.
Yeah, brilliant explanation, Leith. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That's why we all see that the economy is growing, yet everybody's still doing it tougher, and that explains it perfectly. Now, I've got to say, I heard you speaking to Ben Fordham on Sydney's Radio 2GB the other day, and he asked the obvious question, a good question, and I thought your answer was very insightful, and I'd like the audience here to hear it. And the question is, of course, we've got a cost of living crisis, and in particular, we've got a housing crisis. And so we're dealing with these economic pressures. What is the one thing you believe a federal government could do that would have the best effect on that?
Yeah, look, Australia's inflation is being driven, domestic inflation, so the inflation that's derived within the country rather than stuff that comes from overseas, is being driven by basically the housing market and namely rents. So, as we all know, Australia's in a rental crisis. We've got record low rental vacancy rates and rents are going through the roof. Now, this week's quarterly CPI data showed that Australia's rents went up by 7.3%. Last calendar year, it was actually down slightly on September quarter purely because of some government rebates. But effectively, rents as well as the cost of buying a new home, which has been pushed up by demand, etc., is basically stoking Australia's inflation. And that's been stoked by obviously this record population growth because effectively we're growing the population faster than the economy can cope. We're growing it faster than we can build houses, faster than we can build infrastructure. And because of that, we've got really poor productivity as well as rising inflation because demand's outstripping supply. So the number one thing the government can do, and it can be very quick, is they could cut immigration and to take the pressure off demand, to take the pressure off rental costs, take the pressure off the new home market, and basically tame inflation and also cost of living. So that'd be the number one thing they should do.
So that's the first thing you do. We make Leith Van Onselen Prime Minister for the day. You're not going to try and fix the electricity sector or reform the tax system overnight. The first thing you're going to do is cut our immigration rate. To what level?
Look, I honestly think Australia's net overseas migration shouldn't be above 120,000. So the reason why, how I get to that number is up to about 2004, before we ramped it up massively. That was sort of the historical average. It averaged between 80 and 120,000 a year. And I'd argue that, in places like Sydney was a lot better place, around the turn of the century when the Sydney Olympics are on than it is now. Same with Melbourne. Effectively, the Howard government then ramped up immigration. The successive governments ramped it up even more. And the 15 years leading up to the pandemic, we went from about, 100,000 roughly a year up to about 220,000 net overseas migration. Last year, it went to nearly 520,000. It's just too high. Get it back to those historical levels when we coped very well and we didn't have all these pressures. That's what the empirical evidence tells us.
It makes a lot of sense, Leith. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, cheers, Chris. Anytime.
Leith Van Onselen there should get it back to about 120,000 people. He said we've done over 500,000 people in a year, more than the population of Tasmania, and we wonder why we're in strife.